So I get the job of where it all began. Life used to be so much simpler in the good old days. There was just us doctors. We were the important ones. We did everything, and you'd just come in and you'd go through the assembly line and get your assessment done, and it'd be finished. It was much simpler, and we didn't need therapists and all this complicated stuff, and everybody was none the wiser. So, but unfortunately, people realized that it didn't work very well. So you see that today as we talk about functional assessments, and there's 5 speakers, and I'm 1/5 of it is the medical side, whereas in days gone past it would have been all that was talked about. And even nowadays, in many settings, what does a functional assessment consist of? Someone goes to their family doctor, they got to get a form filled out so they can play football. Doctor takes 20 minutes, fills it out, says, yeah, you look like you're alive, maybe take a blood pressure, listen to your heart, and they're done. End of story. So, we got to wonder why do we do it? Well, first of all, regulations. A lot of the time for organized sports, you have to have a medical release or a form to play in the league. But we'd like to go beyond that, and I'm going to focus mainly only on the medical, non-musculoskeletal side of it, because I don't have to do anything else. It's so easy when they come in for their assessments, and I only have to do the non-MSK. It's like, this is easy, because it's so much more complicated, the work they do. My stuff is easy, but really, we're trying to identify health risks. We're trying to identify, current ones that may be of concern, and future ones. Performance barriers that we can identify medically that may be relevant, once again, current or future. And then I think it's important as well to look at it in a broader perspective in terms of wellness counseling. Sports are supposed to be healthy. Well, we all know that it's not always a healthy lifestyle. Drugs, alcohol. A lot of athletes are very sexually active. They're very attractive, both male and female. Anyone who's been to an Olympic Games, towards the end, when athletes are finished and knows what goes on in the Olympic Village, you got to feel sorry for the athlete who competes on the last day, because they don't get a whole lot of sleep the night before, because it's party central there. So these are all issues that need to be addressed in some way. Probably the most common thing that we worry about is sudden cardiac death. It's not a good thing to drop dead on a playing field or on a basketball court, especially if you do it in front of 50 million people on TV. Can these things be prevented? Can they be predicted? Well, yes and no. And so between your family history, examining the patient, history with the patient, you may be able to identify athletes that are at risk. Another issue is concussion, which has become a bigger and bigger issue. Clyde touched on it briefly in one of his slides. A lot of it is also education. In the days gone past, when you'd ask the athlete about concussion, they'll have my bell rung. And a colleague of mine who takes care of one of the junior hockey teams told me that after concussions was becoming a bigger and bigger issue, first athlete she saw, she spent a long time, he had about 8 concussions by the new definition, and she counseled him and went over how important all this is. And amazingly enough, the other 28 assessments she did that day, not one of them had ever had a concussion. Because the first athlete went on and said, whatever you do not tell her you've had a concussion, because she'll go off the deep end about it and drive you crazy. So, you got to, but I think athletes have come full circle because they realize it does make a difference, because as important as posture is and everything else, your brain is kind of important. If your brain doesn't work well, it's hard for you to do your job effectively. So they've learned that it is important to be honest about it. And so this is an opportunity to educate them a little bit if they've had one, and if they haven't, then you can move on. So concussion is another thing that we want to talk about, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but in general you want to know about the number of them, the severity of them, how long they last, how easily do they come on, and then you can potentially counsel them, whether you can stop it if they're playing Australian rules football. The counseling is, why don't you take up bridge? It might be a little bit better for you. And if they've had enough, that it comes down to that. I've had many an athlete where I've had to tell them that it's time to retire. And you might be 18 years old and you retire, and you got to work with them on that as you go through it. Female athlete triad is a condition that many of you may have heard of. And it happens in males as well, but we're talking primarily about female athletes. It's an eating disorder, menstrual irregularity, amenorrhea, stoppage of periods, and osteoporosis. This is a critical condition because it can be permanent, especially in young female athletes when they're laying down their bone structure in their teenage years. That will set their peak bone mass, which then drops off for everybody as they go through life. So you want to start at a higher level. How frequently do I see the female athlete try out full-blown? Hardly ever. I think that most of the athletes who have the true condition actually have mental health issues that just happen to be athletes, and they don't last at the high performance level very long. But you see a tremendous number of athletes who have a tendency towards it, particularly in the aesthetic sports, and they do have disordered eating, not full-blown anorexia, but you need to identify it. And then once again, it's another opportunity to educate. When I go through the history sheet with the athletes, and I'll say to someone, says, why do you think we ask about your periods? Why do you think we care about your periods? None of them have any idea why you ask, and so it's an opportunity to say, well, because if they stop, this means such and such, and that your body is stressed enough that it's not prepared to reproduce. That's not a good thing. We need to identify that and work with it. The list goes on and on. I don't have time to go through all of them, but once again, looking for asthma, metabolic issues, diabetes. The age group varies. In terms of before they get to the nutritionist, even issues with cramping and diet. Although once again, when you got a full team together, it's great because you know that a lot of this is going to get dealt with by someone else. I like delegating. Drug abuse, that can be recreational drugs, that can be performance-enhancing drugs, not that they're ever used in baseball. Mental health issues, I think we've done a terrible job identifying that. Athletes are supposed to be strong, they're supposed to be tough, they're supposed to take care of themselves and not be sensitive, not get depressed, not be emotional. So they often hide those things. So you need to at least open the door to allow them to discuss it. Now this is a delicate topic and it depends on the situation that you're in. If you're doing screening and it's a one-off thing, at least you can give them the idea that it's okay to address these issues, maybe not with me if I'm there once, but if you're working with a team on an ongoing basis, you want to open that door and build that dialogue so they can come to you. This is one situation where the coaches may not and should not probably be aware, because the athlete will certainly not want, by and large, the coach to know that they have issues with their health or may be depressed. Fortunately, that's starting to change. Our recent, we had an advanced team physician meeting in preparation for the lead up to the Olympics, and there was a whole module on mental health. Incredibly important issue that gets underdiagnosed and missed, because if you open that door, it's going to take time, and boy, it's a lot of work. But if you're talking about injury prevention and performance enhancement, once again, the brain's one of the most important organs that you have in your body. The Army actually is miles ahead of sports because they've learned this the hard way in the United States and in the U.S. Army and the Air Force. They don't want some guy sitting at a computer with a hand on a button for a missile who's depressed, who's not concentrating. So they've actually gone full circle. The captain, and they address it, says, I do not want any of you. If any of you are feeling down or stressed, you're in the Gulf, your family's back home, your wife's about to have your first child, and you're here. We want to know about it. You got to bring that up and address it. But it hasn't come into the sports realm yet, and I think that needs to be addressed. And then that minor last one, what we're looking for, the musculoskeletal, but that's not very important, so we'll just forget about that one. How do we do it? Well, same tools that we all use: history, physical exam, and then documentation and follow-up. This is a screening functional assessment, so you're not going to be doing a lot of the follow-up. You're identifying those with risks that need further work, the sudden cardiac death, other issues. I'd have to say when I do these functional assessments, and I maybe see 28, 30 athletes, there might only be 3 of them where there's actually something that needs to be followed up. And every so often I wonder, why am I here? They're young teenagers, they're perfectly healthy. You go through all those things, they have nothing. You do a little bit of education. But every time, every single time I've done it, there's been at least 1 or 2 or 3 athletes where I found some little thing where it can make a difference, and that makes it worthwhile, and it makes me realize, why I am there. Even though, as I say, back at the beginning, we were the only ones that were that we're there. This is a small to see, but this just gives you an example of how we go about the process. We don't have a lot of time, so you got to be prepared. And so what has been developed by SportMed BC is a comprehensive history form which the athlete fills out in advance, and then you can go through it, but it touches on all the important subjects that we've talked about and gives a quick 10-second review of issues that you then need to focus in on. And this is the second part of it, including medications, including any nutritional products they may use. The other thing that has to be aware, depending on what level they're at, is drug testing. Inadvertent positive results happens all the time, and so they need to be aware of what they're using. Once again, our nutritionists, the nutritionists with SportMed BC are keenly aware of that and will counsel and work with the athletes, many of whom are taking a box full of whatevers, which is scares the daylight out of you if they're going to get drug tested. But you can go through that as well. Just a few brief thoughts about the physical exam part. I think privacy is important. It's often done in the room, as you saw the pictures from Clyde and Wendy, where they're doing the MSK functional assessment. There's multiple athletes in one room. It's less than ideal doing that, especially if you're going to start getting into some of the more sensitive issues and different things they may want to bring up or you want to draw out of them. Sometimes that's not practical. In the physical exam, if you're, depending on what degree you're going to go to, if you need to do a genital exam in males, checking for testicles, do they have two, do they have one, do they have issues? Kind of hard to do in a room where they're sitting beside all their peers 5 feet away. So you've got to have a certain amount of privacy. It's also got to be quiet, because if you're going to use a stethoscope, for anyone who uses a stethoscope, it's really hard to use that in a noisy room if you're going to listen to a heart. And sudden cardiac death, one of the screening tests that you're doing is listening for murmurs in a certain position of the body. You've got to be able to hear it, otherwise you're going to miss it. Equipment is pretty straightforward, stuff that you'd have in the office. You don't need a whole lot. Blood pressure cuff, a diagnostic kit for looking in eyes and ears, a scale, and away you go. The tools are pretty simple. Documentation, we've seen some talk about that with Clyde and the follow-ups. You got to be able to document it, which we do. In the good old days, it was nice and simple. Are they fit to play? Are they unfit to play? Day to day, and that's sort of your conclusion. But in the details, you want to give the athlete some things you want them to follow up on. If you're with the team, that's my job to follow up on them. If they're with if it's a one-off and they're with their group, they can go back to their family doctor, and you encourage them to do so and follow up on these things. So in summary, with good planning and preparation, you can do a pretty comprehensive job. That history form is really important. It covers a lot of stuff, and you can read it in 2 seconds. It's efficient. I'm so important. You only need one of me there. You got to have 4 or 5 therapists, but you only need one doc. So clearly I can do a way better job than them. But you can do it pretty efficiently. You can whip through them because you don't have to do a huge part of it, the much more complex, frankly, part of it that has to be done. It's preventative. You're picking up things and educating them. It's performance enhancing, because really what we're there for is to remove any barriers that they have to being the best athlete that they can be. It's functional, it's practical, and educational. You can teach them something a little bit more about their body awareness, especially the younger athletes, but you see it in some of the professional athletes who may have been around for 15 years. They've never had exposure to any of this, or no one's ever given them any, why do we do some of these things? And I don't know, they've always done it. Don't tell me why. You got a male in his 30s. Why are you checking his testicles? Well, I always ask every one of them, what's the #1 cancer in a male in his 30s? 95% of them have no idea. And I sort of say, well, think cycling, think Lance Armstrong. They go, oh, testicle. I said, exactly. It says, women know they're supposed to do breast self-exam. How many guys know in your 30s you're supposed to do a testicular exam? Most of them don't know. Quick little educational thing that you can do with them. And, working with such an incredible team. In the beginning it was just a doc. Now it's a whole team and you're part of it. And you always learn so much when you work with these different people. And finally, this is the 21st century. We've got to say if we have any conflict of interest or affiliations or everything else. But, other than Sports Illustrated that I had up there, which unfortunately I don't own any shares in, I don't have any other conflict of interest at all or biases towards any particular teams of any sport. other than the fact to let you know that that picture just happens to show the leader this year in the USL in goals and the leader in assists, who just happen to be in the same picture on the same team. And I urge all of you to watch the game tomorrow afternoon, as hopefully we will come through successfully, so I can sit down with David and share a few more stories. Thank you very much.